We need to stop attacks in the future.
And we are in whatever business it takes to get the job done.
Find out exactly what they did.
They claim they saved lives, but what they really did was make it impossible to prosecute. Because if what we did to him ever came out in the court of law, the case is over.
One detainee, they waterboarded him 183 times.
If it works, why do you need to do it 183 times?
Maybe when the report comes out, people will finally see that.
A lot of people mistake Abu Ghraib with Guantanamo Bay. Had nothing to do with the CIA. So that was just like a logistical oversight where they basically had people untrained for keeping prisoners. And then they went in and they did these sweeps where it was like, oh, you have a gun to protect your family? Jail.
At Abu Ghraib, standard operating procedures were changed. Normally, military guards are supposed to protect prisoners. Suddenly, they were asked to soften them up for interrogators.
We were never trained to be prison guards. The higher-ups said, use your imagination. Break them. We want them broke by the time we get back. So early on in October, what I saw whenever I walked up to the tier was two soldiers that I had no idea who they were. They had two naked detainees handcuffed to prison cells. I've never been trained in an interrogation, but I definitely didn't think that this is the way interrogation should be. And so I reported it to my lieutenant, and he seemed not to care.
And then they told this one specific shift, apparently just one, that, shake them up, get some intelligence. Most of the people were innocent, and they, smear them with shit. There's, all the pictures of Abu Ghraib is what people think happened in Guantanamo.
When we were all horrified by the images of American soldiers in Abu Ghraib prison, torturing, humiliating, degrading their prisoners back in 2004, the administration, military and the Bush administration, blamed it on a few bad apples.
A few bad apples that will conduct themselves in ways that we're not proud of.
Were there a few bad apples? No. What was bad was the barrel. Who made the barrel? This whole chain of command.
I say that with Abu Ghraib is like, they may not have been the only ones doing it. They were just the only ones dumb enough to take pictures.
Yeah, and to get caught. That's the other thing. Or the U.S.
This one dude comes in and he goes, hey, do you have those pictures? And he goes, yeah, sure. And he gives it to him and he just goes straight to the upper head.
I mean, what was it, a plan? God knows. It's just this stuff that goes on.
It was just a coworker who was like, this shit ain't cool.
Possibly. It's just horrific, the stuff that happened during the war that,
What I learned there was not only the power of the situation to corrupt good people, but also the power of systems that create those situations.
I mean, some rules are stupid, like, Geneva Convention, where you look at, there's a famous, a bayonet can't be triangle pointed. That's illegal because
you can't have hollow points.
No, yeah, you can't have hollow points. But if you want to spray someone with 50 rounds of 223 full metal jacket, go ahead, fully legal under the Geneva Convention. So it's the same thing, right? Okay, if someone's a member of a citizen of a United Nations country, torture is illegal. But all of a sudden, if they're a member of a terrorist organization, all their human rights go away.
Yeah, Tarzay said this. It was like, how did Daesh come during the war on terror? How do you have the deadliest terrorist organization arise during the war on terror? And my whole theory behind a lot of this is because of torture. The first beheading video with Khaled Sheikh Mohammed, he specifically says it's because of torture in Guantanamo Bay. The first prison was actually in Thailand before the salt pit, but the salt pit, the stories that we have there, because a lot of the people who were tortured are out today. There's only a few that weren't. The idea behind it is more the guy. It's so fucked up because the interview with this guy who designed the torture program, where he says it's like good cop, bad cop is how he describes it. It's like, you're such a bad cop that when the next guy comes in and he's real nice.
And the theory is that by doing that you make someone more malleable, and that's all cockamamie. It was based on the assertions of two supposed experts who had never done interrogation, never done intelligence work. The psychological work that they did claim to have degrees in had nothing to do with any work relevant to interrogation or interpreting information or manipulating a human being. They're hacks.
But they would keep you in isolation and all this stuff. The salt pit is a completely dark prison. There's no toilets. It's a brick factory that they changed over. It's at Camp Eagle. It's right near Bagram, and it was only operational for a brief period of time. But basically, it was a sewer because they were shitting in buckets, and like they specifically had a shit bucket room. Like they didn't have like buckets to shit in their own cells. And it was like, and that's the thing that really, really disgusts me, but they were kept in pitch blackness 24/7. So just a flashlight would completely disable you. So imagine being in the dark and you have no idea who's around you. And like anytime someone could like slap you in the face or any of that type of shit.
Major screws you up, man. Like you said, at that point, I'm lucky enough to live,
Keeping books is not a crime. Being a member of al-Qaeda, that's not a crime to me. Being a member of the Taliban, that's not a crime to me. But these erosions that happen with terrorism is the same shit with Assad. When he drops sarin gas on people, he just says, well, they're terrorists. And also it didn't happen. So it's
then you have a lot of fake videos now. And you have the proof that those videos were fake, like the white helmets, for example. They are al-Qaeda, they are Nusra Front, who shaved their beard, wore white hats, and appeared as humanitarian heroes, which is not the case. The same people were killing Syrian soldiers, and you have the proof on the internet anyway. So the same thing for that chemical attack. We don't know whether those dead children, were they killed in Khan Sheikhoun, were they dead at all, who committed the attack if there was attack, what the material.
So you think it's a fabrication?
Definitely, 100% for us it's fabrication.
And that's kind of the thing is, it's like, that's why I'm big into things like the Geneva Convention, even when there's dumb shit like no hollow points. And is that you want to uphold these conventions because when you break these conventions, it inspires radicalism. And so you want to act in an ethical way, because if you're taking people to torture camps and shit like that, you get Daesh. And there's direct evidence. I was in those Telegram groups, and constantly those pictures from Abu Ghraib were used as propaganda.
Yes, recruitment propaganda, yeah.
So it's just ammo. And, half of jihad is social media.
Al-Qaeda wanted the United States, and we know this from the documents. I have one right here that sets it out very explicitly. They wanted to provoke the United States to invade a major Muslim country, to put on the television screen every day images of Americans repressing, suppressing, abusing Muslims. They thought that the United States would invade Afghanistan, and there would be a struggle to the death, a quagmire there, as there had been with the Soviet Union a decade before. The United States military would be destroyed in Afghanistan. The US would disappear as a superpower, as the Soviet Union did. That was the theory. But the United States obliged al-Qaeda by doing something much more useful to them. We invaded Iraq. We gave them those images. In fact, it was a dream, a fantasy of bin Laden's to have images like those from Abu Ghraib, Abu Ghraib and Guantánamo, I should say, which still fertilize the ranks of jihadists around the world. When you see a young Westerner kneeling in this vacant landscape in an orange jumpsuit with a man in black standing behind him with a knife at his throat, declaiming, and then cutting his head off, this image that we all know now, sadly. When you see that, how many here realize that that's a reference to Guantánamo, that orange jumpsuit? I assure you everybody in the Middle East does.
Officers from the Counterterrorism Center came to the 7th floor to brief the top brass.
As they try to understand how 10 hijackers
They were worried about a second attack.
It was tense. It was tense. The special activities, paramilitary folks, all of the analysts would sit and brief senior leadership. And it was an increasing drumbeat of danger and foreboding.
And in the months after 9/11, Rizzo kept hearing the name of one particular suspect the CIA was targeting. The Senate report tells the story.
Abu Zubaydah was assessed to possess detailed knowledge of al-Qaeda terrorist attack plans.
His name kept popping up at the meeting. Abu Zubaydah was a committed, remorseless, psychopathic personality. He was widely thought to be, universally thought to be, a key figure in the al-Qaeda hierarchy.
I was in Guantánamo at the time. And one of the prisoners that has been there for a very long time and has gone through the rendition program and has been the reason why the United States actually set up its enhanced interrogation technique program was Abu Zubaydah. And no case displays this better than the case of Abu Zubaydah, probably the most well-known prisoner now in Guantánamo. And if he wasn't, the film, The Report, has made him so again. And this isn't because of what he did, rather because what was done to him.
So Abu Zubaydah was the first person arrested. So we're going to go back to Operation Cyclone, but I just wanted to touch on this real quick. So Abu Zubaydah, I believe, is 100% innocent.
Abu Zubaydah remains also one of those people about whom it's been said that he is, to quote, too innocent to charge. Think about that. In a land where the presumption of innocence is paramount. Too innocent to charge, but too dangerous to release. That's what's said about him in 2013.
Well, none of them have been, none of them have been proven to be involved in acts of terrorism, and the whole point is they're not brought to trial.
None of them?
None of them. I mean, I'm not saying they aren't terrorists. I'm not saying the majority of them aren't terrorists. I don't know. I just happen to believe that the way to test the evidence against people is to bring them to trial and let's hear the evidence.
He had a traumatic brain injury from shrapnel during the Battle of Kabul. Mm-hmm. So he had no memory. So he couldn't form new memories, but what he was really good at was keeping books. So he kept diaries of everything that was going on in his day. So he was kind of like a safe house keeper. So it's the dude who would have a lot of records and things like that.
When the government found Abu Zubaydah's diary, thousands of pages long, recording minute details of people he met or what he ate every day, they found nothing relating to the terrorist attacks in which he was allegedly involved. What they found instead was the story of a mentally ill individual whose head injury resulted in his writing the diary in any one of 3 different personalities. The FBI's senior expert on al-Qaeda said himself, "This guy is insane, certifiable, split personality." The diaries showed that Abu Zubaydah simply wasn't involved in al-Qaeda. He wrote more about his deep attachment to his mother.
Now, I don't cry when I remember my dad beating up my mom. I don't cry when I remember her crying like a child in my arms when I was a child. I don't cry when I remember all these things as much as I cry when I remember that I offended her.
But the dude is already disabled. He's mentally, he's cognitively disabled. He's the first dude that they capture. And when they go in, there's a huge gunfight, right?
He resisted. There was a shootout. The Pakistanis were the first inside the door, and he stabbed a Pakistani policeman in the neck. But then Abu Zubaydah went up to the roof of his house and tried to jump to the roof of the neighboring house. He exchanged in a gun battle with the Pakistani police down below, and he was shot 3 times and then dropped from the roof of the house onto the ground. The Pakistani doctors who was treating him told me that he had never seen wounds so severe where the patient had lived.
A pile of bodies, and then they realized that, oh, this is the guy we came to get. And the dude was unlucky enough to live.
We have him. He is under U.S. control at the present time. We are responsible for him. He is receiving medical care, and we intend to get every single thing out of him to try to prevent terrorist acts in the future. And if any responsible government official who had any goal other than trying to stop additional terrorist acts, here's a man who knows about additional terrorist acts. Here's a man who trained people to do this. And all this concern about that individual as opposed to concern about the terrorist acts that that individual has tried to commit, has in fact participated in, who has trained people to do it, and who has knowledge of additional people who are located around the world, it seems to me that I've got it exactly right. Thank you.
It's moments like these John Kiriakou will miss when he goes to jail. Sometime soon he'll be told a cell is available and his sentence can begin. He'll leave his wife and 5 children. He was also the first current or former CIA officer to confirm prisoners were being waterboarded, tortured after the 9/11 attacks. He believes his conviction is politically motivated.
The only person who's going to prison for having anything related to do with the torture regime is the guy who blew the whistle on the torture. The torturers aren't going to prison. The people who ordered or conceived of the torture aren't going to prison.
And then they send him to Thailand, right?
Abu Zubaydah would never be seen in public again. He was secretly taken to a black site in Thailand.
The CIA had no prisons. No one else, including the military, wanted these high-level prisoners. We had to put them somewhere, and we had to do it quickly. And that's how black sites came about.
Waterboarding is a technique that was used by the Spanish during the Inquisition against Muslims and Jews who refused to or had hidden their conversion to Christianity. This in Spanish is called tortura del agua, meaning torture of the water. Waterboarding was used by the Nazis. It was used by the Japanese against American prisoners of war. And those Japanese soldiers who waterboarded American prisoners of war were prosecuted for war crimes and executed.
It took only 6 hours before they reached the bottom of the list.
At approximately 6:20 p.m., Abu Zubaydah was waterboarded for the first time. Over a 2.5-hour period, Abu Zubaydah coughed, vomited, and had involuntary spasms of the torso and extremities.
He describes it to the Red Cross, and he can't breathe, and he's beginning to drown. And the feeling of drowning is terrifying.
I struggled against the straps, trying to breathe, but it was hopeless. I thought I was going to die. I lost control of my urine.
During a waterboard session, Abu Zubaydah became completely unresponsive, with bubbles rising through his open, full mouth.
I think it's, don't you at some level want to just say, President Obama, you are being silly. The security of the nation was directly at risk, and we had people in custody who knew things. If we could get the information, it could save lives. The notion that we have to work our way up some gradual scale and that some set of techniques, which we had already construed as legal, could only be used as a very just ridiculous. You're being silly. Don't you want to say that, John, or not?
I wouldn't say silly, I would say naive. I think it's naive to say, oh, well, maybe we could have gotten it some other way. I mean, you could always say that. You could say, well, if Lincoln had not, gone after the South, maybe slavery would have ended on its own and the country would have reunified in 20 or 30 years. I mean, it's impossible to answer a counterfactual like that.
George Stan's first reaction was to turn to me, as was his wont, and say, is any of this stuff legal?
Is that legal? I will make it legal.
Well, we don't torture people. Let me say that again to you. We don't torture people. Okay?
Come on, George.
We don't torture people.
Khalid Sheikh Mohammed.
We don't torture people.
Waterboarding.
We do not. I don't talk about techniques, and we don't torture people. Now listen to me. I want you to listen to me. So the context is it's post 9/11. I've got reports of nuclear weapons in New York City, apartment buildings that are going to be blown up, planes that are going to fly into airports all over again, plot lines that I don't know. I don't know what's going on inside the United States, and I'm struggling to find out where the next disaster is going to occur. Everybody forgets one central context of what we lived through. The palpable fear that we felt on the basis of the fact that there was so much we did not know.
They knew the FBI did have interrogators, so they reluctantly turned to one of them, Ali Soufan.
Ali Soufan is a Muslim and knows the Quran, and he's an FBI special agent. And he is able to go into a room and speak Arabic and identify with the hot buttons that the person he's interrogating has.
Soufan worked to build Abu Zubaydah's trust.
It's about building a rapport with an individual. It's about building that chemistry. It's about building a trust a little bit, because if he's going to tell you something, he needs to have some sense of trust about you.
Bush basically asks two questions, very simple questions. The first question he asks is this effective? And the second question he has is this proposal legal?
I will make it legal.
Sufan saw the temperature manipulations, the slapping, the hitting, and then he sees this confinement box, which they're going to throw Abu Zubaydah into, and he gets furious. He said, "You can't do this kind of thing."
And I was really frustrated because I think that, this is not going to lead us anywhere. I mean, this guy admitted that he never interrogated a person in his life. He doesn't know anything about Islamic extremists, and here he is, trying to call the shots.
And at one point, Safan gets so upset, he calls back on a secure phone to FBI headquarters and says, "I'm going to arrest these guys." He means the CIA folks who are doing this, not the al-Qaeda guy they're interrogating.
Every day, CIA employees in the room kept records of what happened. By day 4,
today's first session had a profound effect on all staff members present. It seems the collective opinion that we should not go much further.
This sort of sense of futility that this isn't working. We're trying this stuff and he's not giving up more information.
Several on the team profoundly affected, some to the point of tears and choking up.
They had been asking about only one thing, the details of the next attack on America. Within days, the interrogators came to a surprising conclusion.
The interrogation team stated that it was highly unlikely that Abu Zubaydah possessed the information they were seeking.
Even the agency people who were involved in the interrogation of Zubaydah had become just convinced that there's nothing else to wring out of him, that he has nothing left, that he has cooperated.
But at headquarters, the operations team insisted it be continued.
The word would come back, try it again, do it again. Push harder, do worse things.
And so the interrogations got even more intense, more aggressive, and continued for another 11 days.
In all, Abu Zubaydah would spend 266 hours in a coffin-sized box, 29 hours in a smaller box, 21 inches by 30 inches by 30 inches.
The Senate report finds no evidence that Zubaydah gave up any critical intelligence after being subjected to these brutal measures that he hadn't already provided beforehand when he was being questioned by the FBI.
Knock his fucking eye out because they beat him so bad. What's really interesting about him, if you Google him, is that he has art, and his art is so specific of all the things that were done to him. He's afraid of bugs, so they would throw scorpions in, they would put people in coffins basically for days at a time. They would put in a coffin for 3 days, and they would put scorpions in there. Thailand stuff that went on is some of the most extreme shit that happened, and it was kind of them testing shit out. What's interesting about enhanced interrogation techniques and CIA rendition is me?
Yeah, very patriotic, to use the correct word, sir.
Oh, well, I use them for a reason. It's because you need to know these words. You need to lock in when you hear somebody say rendition, torture.
What it means, yeah.
Rendition has been used for years in the United States as an actually illegal way to snatch criminals from foreign lands and bring them into American courts. So rendition wasn't exactly a secret thing.
Yes, but this was covert rendition, and it had a big difference. Because the old type of rendition, and you're right, it went back to the 1880s and was judged legal by American courts, was to bring people to justice, to a jury and a judge. But what we're talking about here, and it was a secret program that began about 1995, and that was about sending people not to justice, but to another country. It was about outsourcing the detention and also sometimes interrogation of the prisoners.
So for a little bit of a backstory, Abu Zubaydah was in Afghanistan and had been involved in the post-Soviet presence of Mujahideen within Afghanistan. And it is true and widely accepted that Abu Zubaydah was involved in the facilitation of transporting people to go to camps to learn to fight against various occupations, whether it's in Kashmir or Chechnya or Bosnia. But what he wasn't, which the Americans believed he was, is a member of al-Qaeda. And that camp was run by somebody called Ibn al-Sheikh al-Libi.
Well, let's take the case of Ibn al-Sheikh al-Libi. He was a camp commander in Afghanistan.
And that's really important that we know this, because this camp was closed down in Afghanistan in 1999, 2 years before 9/11. And Ibn al-Sheikh al-Libi and Abu Zubaydah were no longer involved in it. But what happened to Ibn al-Sheikh al-Libi simultaneously when Abu Zubaydah had been captured, or just before that, is that he was sent alive in a coffin.
Put in a box, literally wrapped up in a box.
And then sent to Egypt.
And in Egypt he was interrogated.
Tortured into giving a false confession.
Guess what he came up with? Some very interesting intelligence.
That al-Qaeda was working with Saddam Hussein on obtaining weapons of mass destruction.
Saddam Hussein was training al-Qaeda. It was information they wanted. And it was used
by Colin Powell
before the United Nations to justify the war on Iraq.
Based on that false confession.
And Colin Powell referred to the fact that it came from a detainee under interrogation, but he never said that this was intelligence that had been obtained under Egyptian interrogation methods, i.e. torture. In fact, if you look at the memos from the people in the CIA who examined the case, that this information was not credible because of the fact that it had been obtained under Egyptian interrogation. They wrote that down, they warned the White House about this, and yet it was still used.
Trace the story of a senior terrorist operative telling how Iraq provided training in these weapons to al-Qaeda.
After we went to Iraq, after we found out that there's no WMDs, after we found out that al-Qaeda and Saddam were not working together, they went back to Ibn Sheikh al-Libi. And this is all according to the Armed Services Committee. And they asked him, why did you lie? He said, well, I gave you what you want to hear.
He complied.
Absolutely. I want the torture to stop. I gave you anything you want to hear.
But the consequences of that...
Tragic. Absolutely. The world is different.
So anyway, Operation Cyclone.